Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me? My name is Mary Jo Kane, and I am the director of the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport. And I want to take just 20 seconds of, frankly, something that's rather spontaneous and not the least bit on point, which is that haven't we had a spectacularly beautiful fall in terms of the weather? All these many years ago, I knew that I moved to Minnesota for the weather, and here it is, finally. So I want to welcome you to what I know will be a thought-provoking evening of insight and discussion regarding how reform efforts occurring in big-time college sports may, although I suggest will, change the face of intercollegiate athletics forever as we know it. But before we get to the panel, I want to share with you a time-honored tradition of the Tucker Center's Distinguished Lecture. Every year, through the generous support of the Mueller family, we award the Edie Mueller Scholarship Parks and Recreation Memorial Award, which supports undergraduate students pursuing a program in rec, park, and leisure studies, and encourages those students to further their involvement and deepen their commitment to this academic discipline. To announce this year's award winner, I want to introduce to you Dr. Connie Magnuson, who is a senior lecturer, and she is the director of the School of Kinesiology's Rec, Park, and Leisure Studies program. So I'm now going to ask Dr. Magnuson and our student award winner this year, Alyssa, to please come forward onto the stage.
Edith Mueller was a student at the University of Minnesota in the Recreation, Park, and Leisure Studies department until her untimely death. To honor Edie's memory, the Mueller family, who is here with us tonight, her mother Mike and sister Carrie, established a scholarship to provide students pursuing a recreation degree with financial support to encourage further involvement and opportunities in their academic career. Alyssa Schmeling is an outdoor person at heart. Her love of sharing the outdoors with others led her to change her major and to pursue a degree in recreation. I had the pleasure of traveling with Alyssa and a group of students to Tanzania this year, where we explored 5 different national parks and conservation areas throughout the country, and also while we were there, we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. This exciting expedition and life-changing experience was made possible for Alyssa with the financial support of the Edith Mueller Scholarship. Alyssa recently graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in Recreation, Park, and Leisure Studies and a minor in Outdoor Recreation and Education. She now works full-time for the Three Rivers Park District as the facility coordinator at the Silverwood Regional Park. The 2014 recipient of the Edith Mueller Scholarship, Alyssa Schmeling.
I also want to announce another exciting new initiative that the Tucker Center launched this summer, and that is the Pam Borton Endowment for Promotion of Girls and Women in Sport Leadership. This one-of-a-kind endowment honors the legacy and contributions of Pam Borton to the University of Minnesota, and its purpose is to promote and enhance leadership among girls and women within a sport context. What is great about this particular fund is that under the leadership of President Kaler, the university launched what's called the Fast Start program, and once you reach a certain level, which we have now done, you basically get a dollar-for-dollar match where the University of Minnesota will match dollar for dollar what people give to the fund. Now, I was a sociology major, not a math major, but if you give $100, that $100 gift is immediately worth $200. And I think that that is a tribute not only to President Kaler and his administration, but also to Coach Borton. And so how about a round of applause? Finally, I want to acknowledge members of the Tucker team for all of the hard work they've done behind the scenes two of our graduate students, Terry Hazelwood and Marnie Kennard, and staff member extraordinaire, Jonathan Sweet. And as always, a special thanks goes to Associate Director Dr. Nicole Navoy, who has overseen this entire event, which I can assure you is no small task. So how about another round of applause, this time for the Tucker team. The Tucker Center has a threefold mission. We conduct research on the impact of sport in the lives of girls and women. We provide first-rate educational opportunities for students. And we are deeply engaged in community outreach and public service. Our distinguished lecture allows us to bring all parts of that mission together by inviting nationally known scholars, educators, policymakers, administrators. We share the latest information and highlight the most significant issues on how sports make a real difference for girls and women, their families, and their communities. I can think of few other issues more timely and significant today than to examine the brave new world of reform in college sports. Last August, the NCAA revised its rules to allow the Big Five power conferences more autonomy in providing additional financial resources and medical care to student athletes. Also last August, Judge Claudia Wilken ruled in favor of Ed O'Bannon in his long-standing lawsuit filed against the NCAA. She ruled that schools be allowed to give athletes some of the money they generate when schools use their license the athlete's name, image, and likeness. According to Judge Wilken, refusing to pay athletes to generate millions of dollars for their schools is, in her words, an affront to basic fairness. And one of the questions that we will ask tonight, and maybe even answer, is that really true? Some of you may also know that a group of prominent economists filed an amicus brief in support of Northwestern's football players' bid to unionize. The impact of these unprecedented decisions isn't yet fully known, but here's one thing we do know. Change is inevitable, but what that change will mean for college sports in general, and women's sports, protected by Title IX in particular, is, according to most experts, anybody's guess. But those of us in the Tucker Center decided that we could and should do better than anybody's guess, and thus the purpose of tonight's panel, where we will hear from three distinguished experts, each of whom will bring a particular perspective to the many and complicated issues that are at hand. So now I would like each of the panelists to come up and sit down, and I will introduce each one of them, and please hold your applause until I'm through my introductions. Our first panelist is Erin Buzuvis, who is the director of the Center for Gender and Sexuality Studies at Western New England University School of Law. She teaches courses ranging from Title IX compliance to employment discrimination. Her research examines gender discrimination within a sports context, as well as the connections between law and sports culture. Buzuvis is the co-founder of the Title IX blog, an interdisciplinary resource for legal developments, commentary, and scholarship about Title IX's application in athletics and in higher education. The second person you'll hear from tonight is Sandy Barbour, the new athletic director at Penn State University. She also served as the athletic director at the University of California, Berkeley from 2004 to 2014. During her tenure there, Barbour guided Cal Athletics through one of the most successful periods in school history. Named one of the 100 most influential women in business in the Bay Area in 2008, Barbour was also chosen as the Regional Athletic Director of the Year by the National Association of Collegiate Athletic Directors. In 2006, she was named the National Administrator of the Year by the National Association of Collegiate Women Athletic Directors. Our final panelist is Beth Goetz, who is in her second year at the University of Minnesota, where she serves as the Deputy Athletic Director and the Department Senior Woman Administrator. Goetz arrived at the U of M via Butler University, where she was an Associate AD from 2008 to 2013. She has experts in many facets of athletic administration, including oversight of various sports, student-athlete academic services, and budget and finance. She is also responsible for Title IX eligibility and compliance, along with developing and monitoring a gender equity plan. As a former college soccer player and soccer coach, she holds multiple perspectives on and clearly firsthand experiences with big-time intercollegiate athletics. So let us all give a very warm Minnesota welcome to these three distinguished panelists.
Well, thank you very much. Wow, I can't believe I'm in the lineup in between Professor Kane, a scholar I admire, and the athletic director from Penn State. Wait till I tell my mother this. Let's section 5. So, oops. Okay, great. So I'm going to lay the foundation for our talk tonight by talking in more detail about the recent litigation that's been challenging the NCAA's amateurism principle. Now, I mean, you probably don't need me to tell you that amateurism is something that the NCAA cares very seriously about. In one version or another, it has been a bedrock principle embedded in NCAA policies going back to its founding in 1905. What the version of amateurism that's currently at stake is codified in the NCAA's bylaws that prohibits an athlete from receiving any money, including money from the university over and above the athletic scholarship, which, according to the bylaws, can cover things like tuition, room, board, and the cost of books, but nothing else. And another component of that amateurism principle is that athletes can't take any money from third parties related to their athletic participation, subject to a couple of exceptions, but that's generally the gist of it. That amateurism principle is being challenged and criticized on a couple of different angles. One of them is that an athlete's permissible scholarship, the money that a college can cover for a student athlete, doesn't actually cover all of the costs that an athlete might incur to attend a university and go to school. So many argue that it's unfair that an athlete who's providing these services to a university, in many cases, has to go into debt to cover the costs that the athlete has to pay in order to participate. And another second argument about criticizing the athlete's amateurism rules is that this system is tantamount to exploitation, because at the same time that the athlete isn't allowed to receive any kind of compensation, and the athlete has to maintain this amateur status, big-time college athletics is anything but amateur, of course. Those two criticisms combined have generated a number of different legal challenges, and I'm going to tell you about the three that are sort of currently in the works. The first, as you already heard, is the labor law case against Northwestern, filed by the College Athletics Players Union. Then I'll talk about the O'Bannon case, which you already heard mentioned, as well as the next chapter in antitrust litigation, picking up where O'Bannon left off, which is a case called Jenkins versus NCAA. So starting off with the Northwestern case. This is a case that began when football players at Northwestern University filed a petition with the National Labor Relations Board, which is the federal agency that enforces labor law. And it was a petition that requested permission to hold an election that would have allowed the athletes to elect to be represented by a union. The legal issue that this petition raised was whether football players are considered employees within the meaning of the statute that protects workers' rights to organize. So are football players employees within the meaning of the National Labor Relations Act? What happened in this case, actually, as you already heard, is that at the regional level, the National Labor Relations Board agreed that they were employees and granted that petition to form a union. And I'm going to talk about the details of that decision in a second, but just in terms of the overview, what's happening now with that case is that it's on appeal. I believe we will hear the results of that appeal from the full National Labor Relations Board very soon. However, it's not clear that that will be the last chapter in the litigation around this case, because one can appeal a final decision of the National Labor Relations Board to the federal courts, and you can even appeal a couple of times within the federal courts, well, at least one time within the federal courts. So it could be a while before we have the definitive answer on this question of whether football players are employees. But the football players here have at least won, they have won step one. So the rationale that the regional director used to determine that these football players were employees used two different factors as touchstones for defining employee. What is an employee? An employee is someone who receives compensation for services, and an employee is someone who is subject to their employer's control. So the question was whether Northwestern football players met these two characteristics. And the regional director agreed that they did. In terms of compensation for services, the regional director looked at the fact that student athletes, the football players, received athletic scholarships, which are a thing of value. The director tallied up the things that typically are covered by a Northwestern athletic scholarship and guessed that it's probably worth $76,000. $76,000 a year for an athletic scholarship. So clearly there's something of value that the athlete is receiving. And in exchange, the athlete has to provide participation in the athletic program. That those two things are connected, they're linked. That the athletic scholarship that athlete would not receive it if they failed to meet their obligations to the athletic program. If they stopped participating, they would lose that money. So there's definitely an agreement, an exchange there. To the point about whether the athlete is receiving compensation, is the athlete providing services in exchange for this compensation? What is the college getting out of it? The director pointed out how Northwestern receives lots of revenue through the efforts of its football program. So it appeared to the director that the athlete was receiving compensation in exchange for a service that the athlete was providing. Then the director looked at employer-like control and made a number of observations. One is that the time commitment that's required in big-time college athletic programs is enormous, up to 60 hours a week, at least in the preseason. That the team has rules that are really intrusive on players' private lives. The athletes couldn't, for example, make decisions about where to live, or if they could leave campus, or if they could hold a job without getting their coach's permission. And the team also exerted control over the players' academic engagements, when they had to attend study hall, what classes they could take, and things like that. And those are characteristics of control that athletes had that other students at Northwestern didn't have. So the court also made that point, that they're subject to this level of control that's really different in both character and scope than other students. And then finally, the director just distinguished entirely student athletes from other cases involving students who were seeking the right to unionize, particularly grad students. And in previous case involving grad students, the National Labor Relations Board said that the relationship between a university and its grad students was primarily educational, because you had work that was being performed subject to the oversight and supervision of the faculty, and was being performed for credit and in pursuit of an academic degree, and these weren't characteristics of the football player's experience. So when you put all those things together, the board reached the conclusion that athletes in this case were considered employees. Now, importantly, the decision doesn't say that all athletes are employees for purposes of the National Labor for the purposes of the National Labor Relations Act. Only student athletes for whom these conditions are true would qualify under this test. In fact, the director even distinguished walk-on football players from scholarship players, because walk-on players don't receive something for value in exchange for participation. They're all participating for the love of the game. So I think going forward from this case, assuming that it's upheld, if it's upheld, it will mean one thing, that college football players at Northwestern will have the right to elect to be represented by a union, which will mean that they can sit across a bargaining table from Northwestern and use their collective bargaining power to demand whatever the market would permit them to demand. Athletes have said that the reason why they're doing this is to obtain better access to health care and comprehensive insurance. So that would certainly be one item that we would expect to see on the collective bargaining table. But there's technically no limit other than what the market will bear in terms of other things that athletes could presumably ask for. And then what will happen to other schools? Well, the scope of the National Labor Relations Act only applies to private schools. So theoretically, we could imagine athletes in the first wave of cases that might follow this, athletes in likely football programs at other big-time Division I private schools also filing petitions to join the union. And to the extent their programs are similar to Northwestern's, we would expect those petitions to be granted. The more complicated cases are going to come from petitions filed by athletes in programs that are dissimilar from Northwestern's. So what about a Division II program? And then what about sports that are not revenue generating, including women's sports? In those cases, what we would expect to happen is that the board would ask these same questions. Are they receiving a scholarship? Is it value? Are they providing a service in exchange for that scholarship? And I wonder, I think it's possible to imagine that the board would say, if your program isn't bringing in revenue, you're not providing a service in exchange for that scholarship. So it doesn't necessarily stand to reason that just because some athletes have met that test for defining employee, that other athletes would as well. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to talk about the antitrust litigation that's also percolating at this moment. And the case was called O'Bannon versus NCAA. And as you heard during the introduction, this was a case challenging the NCAA's rules that prevent athletes from sharing in the revenue that its institution, the institution that it plays for, and the conference that institution is in, and the NCAA as a whole, can all generate by licensing the names, images, and likenesses of those players. What kind of licenses are we talking about? We're talking about when a school or a conference or the NCAA sells the rights to use athletes' images in video games, for example. That's a lucrative licensing contract. And then, of course, the even more pervasive are broadcasting contracts with broadcasters. So broadcasters are paying conferences for the right to show athletes' names, images, and likenesses. And under NCAA rules, athletes are receiving none of those proceeds. So a class action lawsuit was filed by a group of present and former athletes using the antitrust statute to challenge the NCAA's prohibition on on athletes receiving money from licenses. So antitrust. To understand what antitrust is, let me first tell you what a trust is, and then we can make it a negative. Right? So a trust is any kind of agreement between corporations that reduces competition in the marketplace. So the classic example of this is like a price-fixing agreement. Two corporations that make the same product get together and say, we're going to charge this high price, and it might be more than the market would otherwise bear, but no one's going to stop them if they're the only two suppliers of that product. That would be anti-competitive. So there's a statute that restricts corporations or entities' ability to make those kinds of anti-competitive agreements. And the analysis that a court will use in evaluating whether those agreements violate the law is called an analysis of looking for what courts call an unreasonable restraint. So to determine whether a restraint on trade is unreasonable, it's a three-part test. Don't think about it as a three-part test. We're sports people, so I'll describe it instead as a tennis match. Okay, so there's three volleys here. The first step in antitrust litigation is that the plaintiff has to meet an initial burden of proof by establishing that in some way the defendant's conduct is restraining trade. So that's like the serve. If the serve goes in, right, and the plaintiff meets that burden, then there's a return of serve by the defendant. And the defendant has to prove that, yes, okay, there's a restraint, you've established that, but we've got some really good justifications for that restraint that are actually pro-competitive in nature. And then if the defendant meets that burden and successfully returns the serve, the plaintiff has one more time to volley by proving that the defendant could accomplish that same pro-competitive purpose in a manner that is less restrictive on trade. Okay, so that's the outline. I know there's a lot of legalese there. Just to help us keep track of where we are in this tennis match, I'll repeat on my slides the various steps of this test. So step one is, does the defendant's conduct restrain trade? Well, in the O'Bannon case, the court agreed that yes, in fact, the NCAA, by serving as the way in which schools come together and make an agreement among each other, they're kind of like price fixers. In a way, they're fixing the price for in the market for education, at least as to athletes, because they've essentially fixed at zero the price that they're willing to pay to athletes to come and attend their school. Thinking about it another way, if the NCAA did not have restrictions on amateurism, the market might allow athletes to negotiate for some money back from the university that would make the cost of attending even less for them. And then there's actually a second way in which the NCAA's policies restrain trade, and that's by knocking the athletes out of competition in the marketplace to sell those commercial licenses. Right? If there were no such restrictions, then the conferences and the NCAA and even individual institutions would have to compete with the athletes for selling those broadcast rights to broadcasters, for example. But you knock out your competitor and you can charge whatever price you want, and that restrains trade. So the serve went in, so to speak. On the return of serve, right, the defendant has to give some justification for those restraints. And the NCAA provided 5 different justifications. They argued that it was necessary to preserve amateurism, that it would be promoting the separate the separate product on the market by distinguishing it from professional sports if they had an amateur program. And a number of other rationales as well, but in the interest of time, I'll stick to the ones that actually prevailed. The NCAA also argued that athletics, by integrating athletes with the academic environment, that made schools more attractive in the marketplace for attracting students. That students would be more likely to attend school if they thought that the athletes were sort of on an equal playing field and not like hired guns. The court rejected most of these, but did accept a couple of them as valid, which meant that we got to the third step, deciding whether there could be some kind of remedy. And the plaintiff offered 3, but again, I'll focus on the ones that prevailed. The court said that if you can come up with a less restrictive means of accomplishing that goal of preserving amateurism and providing the integration of athletes into the athletic environment. And you can do that in one of two ways. One, you can allow colleges to use that licensing revenue to fund some kind of stipend that would cover the gap between what athletes receive in their scholarships and the true cost of attendance. And the other thing that the court said that colleges could do, or that the NCAA could do, is allow colleges to take that licensing revenue and to hold it in trust for athletes until after they leave school. And yes, I know. You could hold it in trust for athletes until after they leave school. I'll be really quick. And you can make them payments out of that trust fund. And the amount that the court decided would be fair, that would still preserve amateurism, right? So it can't be too high or they'll look like professionals. That would still preserve amateurism, but that would not restrain trade, would be $5,000 a year. So that was the balance that the court struck. So if this decision is upheld, we would expect the NCAA to have to modify its amateurism requirements in one of these two ways and allow more compensation for athletes than they currently receive. So with that, I'm out of time. I'll yield the floor. I'll yield, and do you have slides? I do. Okay.
I too am going to start my timer here, because we've been threatened within an inch of our lives here. Thank you. for this kind invitation. I have always admired the Tucker Center and its great work on behalf of girls and women, and I think that this is particularly a timely subject and a timely conversation tonight. It's interesting that we use the term reform, and that reform in our materials has quotation marks around it, because frankly, I don't know that we're in reform mode. I'm going to talk about reform in a minute. It seems a little bit, having done this for a little over 30 years, I started at 12. At some point, I'm going to have to revise that to like 6. I don't know. It seems to me more like a course correction that we may be approaching. But one of the issues, one of the very serious issues, I think that we're confronting is that we, intercollegiate athletics, the academy perhaps around athletics, has not done a very good job of educating, and we've certainly not done a good job from a public relations standpoint around all of these issues. Because frankly, I have answers to every one of Erin's contentions up there. Not really, but and we've not articulated the value of intercollegiate athletics, I think, fully to both the campus and obviously to individual student athletes. And now, as we've heard, we're being challenged on every front. I must add that I believe that many of the students involved, particularly in the O'Banion case, and I've just come off of 10 years on the West Coast, so I'm familiar with Ed, I'm familiar with his UCLA situation. A lot of the student athletes that have become a part of both the Northwestern case and who have joined in on the O'Banion case and Kessler and some of the others are very ill-informed about what they think it is that they're going to receive or what the end product might be. We've also not done, as an enterprise, we've not done a good job of helping the public to understand the bifurcated nature of our financial models. University of Minnesota, 25 programs, 25 intercollegiate programs, Penn State University, 31. We have 3, you all I think probably have 3, that are net revenue producers. Minnesota has 3, Penn State has 3. Mary Jo probably can't do the math, but the rest of us can. Most of our programs, that's the only shot I'll take at you, Mary Jo, I promise. Most of our programs are net money losers. Okay? I don't think we've done a good job of that. Those billions and billions of dollars that we're talking about go to fund the entirety of our intercollegiate athletics entity. There are probably a dozen programs in this country across all of college athletics that either are net zero without any institutional support or actually finish the year in a surplus. So we're talking about maybe 12 programs that make money, that have any kind of profit. And probably some of those 12 are net neutral. Okay? So that's something we've not done a good job of talking about. Those athletes, our student athletes, are sharing in those revenues. It's how we fund their scholarships. It's how we fund their travel. It's how we fund the medical care as it currently exists. It's how we fund their meals. And we'll talk a little bit about meals here. So how did we get here? You know, we've been through many iterations of reform. We've been through academic reform, we've been through compliance reform, we've been through financial reform, most recently food reform. We've traversed various different degrees of presidential and CEO leadership and control, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But as much as we'd like to say that we're about education, and certainly at our very core, we are educators, our students come to our universities to receive an education, to participate in an education, and if they don't, shame on them and shame on us for not requiring that they do. But as much as that is at our core, we're also businesses. You know, many, many years ago, I felt I needed to go back and get an MBA for that very reason. But the fact is that we're here today because of our society's insatiable appetite for college sports, and in particular, college football. although I would certainly have to say here in Minnesota, basketball and hockey and maybe a few others there. But that appetite has been monetized into billion-dollar television contracts, multi-million-dollar shoe and apparel deals, corporate names on our buildings and fields, and our outpouring of philanthropic support that is the envy of most deans on campuses. What athletics is able to do from a philanthropic standpoint, from a fundraising standpoint. But as in any competitive business environment, the cost of our enterprises is only moving in one direction. There was an article probably early in the spring about how the University of California, Berkeley was in this environment able to kind of roll things back. Well, I participated in that, obviously, and I answered the reporters' questions. But after I got off the phone, I was like, we are trying to hold on for dear life, but we are absolutely every day, every year, year over year over year, spending more money. We're spending it on coaches and athletic director salaries. We're spending it on capital expenditures, on the latest and greatest in facilities and technology. And now this new legislative reform, if you want to call it that, will cost us millions of dollars related to meals and educational opportunities for student athletes. Now, don't get me wrong. I am, and my institution, my current institution and my previous institution, are fully supportive of the changes to meal legislation and the addition of up to cost of attendance for full scholarships. But these are on the top of the list of the escalating costs. At the top of the list of our escalating costs are salaries and facilities. I was the athletic director at Tulane University in 1996. And I had a coach by the name of Tommy Bowden, and he had been there 2 years. He'd taken us from 2-9 to 7-4, and then 11-0. And he was recruited away to Clemson University, and we actually, Tulane, little old Tulane, offered him about $50,000 more than Clemson did, and he chose to leave. But you know what that number was in 1996? It was $350,000. Where have our coaches, we're talking football here, where have our football coaches' salaries gone from there? It's crazy. There was a time, at that time, there were 2 football coaches in the country making 7 figures, making more than $1 million. Steve Spurrier and Bobby Bowden. Now there are 75. So that is part of our challenge. And the other problem is we don't trust each other. We use the thinking, the rationale, if you can call it that the more successful we are, the more money we will make, and we are always looking for that leg up. This is where presidential control comes into play. Our presidents, in conjunction with their athletic directors, need to take a look at what makes sense in the academy. What behaviors in intercollegiate athletics fit what's going on our campuses. I certainly, and again my institution is as well, in favor of autonomy and the Autonomous 5, because there are a number of things that we must get done and we've been frankly unable to do, and the cost of attendance stipend is certainly one of them. And we must do it in fairness to student athletes, but frankly we also must do it in kind of our public relations environment at this point in time. The cost of attendance scholarships, multi-year scholarships, and better health care coverage are certainly the primary ones. We need to be able to provide these benefits to be able to not only say, but to be able to demonstrate that we are using our resources to the betterment of our student athletes and that we are taking care of them. And the health care is probably the primary one there, with it being that institutions would be allowed to take care of and would be required to take care of athletic injuries in perpetuity for student athletes. Frankly, after those are in place, we have to have the discipline not to use our autonomy, not to use our ability. One of our biggest vulnerabilities on our own campuses is that so many of our common practices in college athletics are either inconsistent with the practices in the academy, or at minimum inconsistent with the opportunities provided to students across the board on our campuses, thus creating a discourse between student athletes and their fellow students on campus. Most of these practices are justifiable in isolation: training table, advanced registration, special tutoring and counseling, customized housing, night before home game hotel stay, charter travel, and the list goes on. Again, most of those are justifiable in isolation. However, when we take a step back, the cumulative impact of that list is a potential resentment by students, faculty, administration, and potentially our community. Intercollegiate athletics has the ability to be such a positive for a university. I do believe that we've been bullied into thinking that the only way we can be positive is by winning, and the only way to win is to spend money. We've got to break that cycle. So if nobody's spending money, then we have a more equitable playing field. Well, I'm not naive. That horse has left the barn. And besides, I think that those are the concepts that Erin was referring to in her antitrust remarks around us, colluding, if you will. I don't think Erin used the word collude, but that's what it is. Price fixing, collusion, all the same thing, right? But I do think that, again, I think I've said it before, the presidents and ADs in conjunction need to exercise restraint and better manage the cost of doing business in college athletics. So what happens from here? As Mary Jo said, the only thing that is certain is that our future will be more expensive. We know cost of attendance scholarships, stipends are coming. There's no doubt in my mind. The food legislation is already here. Unlimited meals will cost campuses anywhere, depending on the size of the program, from $750,000 to $2 million. Cost of attendance scholarships will cost somewhere between $1 and $2 million, again, depending on size. Judge Wilkins' $5,000 revenue in trust, there's a small difference there, would cost Penn State $1.5 million this year if it were to be in play. Many questions, obviously, to be answered. Beth is going to talk more about the implications of Title IX. There's a lot of disagreement around that, but that will also tell us, about cost. How many, what portion of our student athletes are we going to need to apply some of this to? The other side of that is places like Minnesota and Penn State, regardless of what we have to do, will want to apply that across the board to all of our student athletes. Do we have the resources to do that? Again, remember those 22 cost centers and the 3 revenue centers at Minnesota, and again, a very similar picture at Penn State. The fact is, we don't know a lot about Title IX's application. I think we all have opinions. I certainly have mine, and I'd be happy to be questioned on it. But there's plenty of disagreement. We do know this. It will cost money, and it will cost programs like Minnesota and Penn State at 25 and 31 programs respectively. It'll cost us a lot more than it will Texas and Alabama, who sit at 17 programs apiece. And I'm very concerned that as we are forced, if you want to call it that, to keep up with the Joneses or to comply with some of these court rulings, that one of the intended or unintended consequences will be that schools will have to look to reduce programs. We've been through this based on the economy and some other things, but I think this could be another game changer, if you will, for schools looking at what they are offering across the board. The other concern I have, and this is also, obviously the first one is very serious. This is also a very serious concern that I have. We are already operating in an environment where we are looking for every dollar. We are squeezing every dollar out of what we do. We are maybe doing some things on our campuses that we, in an ideal world, would not do, around corporate sponsorships, around some of letting television wag the television tail, wag the dog. As you want to squeeze more and more money out of those television contracts, you have to give up more and more control, which then means as an institution you have less control, which means as a season ticket holder, as a donor, as a student, that you are giving up maybe some of the things that you would prefer from game times or days of the week or 6-day and 12-day window kinds of things. So those concern me greatly because ultimately the things we do today, particularly around our students, the things we do today, and I think we all know that nationally we have some concerns around student attendance at football games, at hockey games, at all of our events. Our students are going to be tomorrow's donors, and if they're not attending today, we're going to have issues down the road. And if they don't grow up to be donors, if they don't grow up to be season ticket holders, the cycle just regenerates itself in terms of then we don't have that revenue to spend on our students. So you ask, is this a game changer? You bet it is. I think that some of it is strictly about education. Some of it's very real. Why our student athletes do not have access to a cost of attendance scholarship, I don't know how we justify that. Every other student on campus does. But some of the other things, we need to do a better job about explaining and educating what our student athletes actually do have access to. So there is no doubt in my mind that the future will look very different. I think we'll know in the next couple of years how different we're looking at. So thank you.
Good evening. I have to question Nicole's coaching ability tonight, as she's got me batting cleanup in this lineup here. So, but I'll do my best to see if we can get us home. Special thank you to you and Mary Jo for having me here tonight. I'll have to adjust this here. I got you guys by a few inches. We are just so fortunate to have the Tucker Center on our campus, and really appreciative of all the great work that you all do for women's sports and researching girls and women and Title IX. So it's just a pleasure to be involved with you. The athletic department really appreciates all the opportunities we have to collaborate with you all, and I'm excited to be here tonight to talk a little bit about what this reform is going to mean for women's sports and for Title IX. Quick story, though, before I get started. I'm leaving the football game on Saturday, and a very excited young man, young Mr. Devine, may be in the audience here tonight, stops me to say he's going to be at the Tucker Center lecture tonight. He goes on to say how excited he is that he's going to have the opportunity to listen to and learn from Sandy Barbour, Penn State Athletic Director. So just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how exciting it is to have her at the helm, one of the very few women to ever hold a position at the highest level. So maybe a little round of applause for Sandy. And Mary Jo, we've got young men talking about the Tucker Center at a football game. Way to go. And we won, yes. Go Gophers. As we hang on to the last few warm and sunny days, I've been thinking back on the most successful sports stories of the summer. For those of us here in Minnesota, we'd say it was another great year for Lindsay Whalen, Janelle McCarville, and the Minnesota Lynx. We cheered them on to the playoffs. Across the country, though, I would have to say that Monet Davis captured the attention and spirit as she pitched in the Little League World Series. Lindsay and Monet already have a few things in common: 30,000 plus Twitter followers, They both were on the radar of Coach Gino Ariyama. Lindsay's obviously through USA Basketball. But for those of you that don't know, Coach Ariyama reached out and gave Monet a congratulatory call that resulted in an NCAA violation. A minor violation, but I think really here the point is how far we've come, that we can celebrate her accomplishments, the accomplishments of the team, and that the coverage for women's sports has changed so much over the years. For a few days, it was not only one of the great women's sports stories, it was certainly one of the best stories in the country. Title IX has provided both Lindsay and Monet with opportunities to pursue their passion in sport, and we want them all to ensure that given the current dynamics, we are able to give her the opportunity to one day put on the college uniform of her choice and pursue a degree in a safe environment, an empowering environment. Both Erin and Sandy have shared with you many of the factors that are contributing to the evolving landscape in college athletics. What do these changes mean for women's sports programs and the athletes who are participating? How will these legal decisions and legislative changes affect the way we operate? And how will they be considered when decisions are made by athletic departments? Change has been a constant throughout NCAA existence as the membership has responded to recruiting trends, increased television and corporate sponsorship revenues, conference realignment, and several other influencing factors. I'm afraid I will offer more questions than answers to what these impact these court cases and new autonomy structure will have. It's still fairly unclear. What we do know is that we must make a commitment to fully consider the short and long-term implications that these outcomes may have on all student athletes, and particularly on women. As we all know, the reality is that while Title IX was passed over 40 years ago, institutions are still struggling to achieve compliance in all areas outlined by the law. Everyone within a collegiate athletic department plays a role in ensuring equity. But the process in place on each campus to evaluate participation, scholarships, and other benefits will be extremely important as we face an unknown future. As presidents and athletic directors guide their programs forward, the goal must be to maintain integrity of the educational model and continue to foster an equitable environment that preserves the same opportunities for women as for their male counterparts. Operational decisions such as building new facilities, hiring coaches, and even modes of travel must be looked at closely by administrators as they look at national and conference trends in an effort to remain competitive in the market. What can't be overlooked is the impact that those sport-specific decisions have on equality within the program. We must be intentional about not operating within sports silos and give consideration to the perspective that values the department as a whole. In what might be considered the first reaction to pending legal cases, even preceded the vote on autonomy, as Sandy mentioned, we did see some changes in NCAA rules. One such change was the deregulation of current legislation that has allowed for institutions to provide greater nutrition and meals to student athletes. Just 4 years ago, we saw legislation that restricted nutrition, when it could be provided and what kind we could provide. Now we have significant flexibility in meeting the needs of our student athletes in this area. Immediately, the arms race began with fueling stations, nutrition stations, increased training tables, and of course, the ability to finally add cream cheese to a bagel. You would not believe the discussions we've all had on our campus about bagel spreads. We can give them peanuts, we can give them bagels, but we can't put peanut butter on the bagels. Don't even get me started about chocolate milk. The level of ridiculousness just continues to be crazy when we talk about specifics of the NCAA rules. But as we move forward, we look at more important priorities. As the president I worked for at the time said, there must be more important things the membership can address. He was right. These nutritional benefits are a good first step in recognizing the needs of our student athletes. But even with this, there are Title IX implications, as each campus must consider what nutrition looks like for our women, as well as football student athletes, who are certainly more often discussed. Men and women certainly have different nutritional needs, which are impacted by the demands of sport. Although we are focused on women's athletics here tonight, it's also important to acknowledge how complex these issues are and that they have the potential to impact men's non-revenue sports as well. When departments become too stretched, will they make changes in a way that supports men's Olympic sports and women's sports? Moving forward, there are many forces that previously did not exist, pulling on a finite amount of resources. As you heard earlier, there are no shortage of legal challenges that could someday lead college athletes to be compensated beyond an athletic scholarship. Those that are in the front of the courts now focus on sharing some of a multi-billion-dollar industry profits with football and men's basketball student athletes. How will this impact women's sports? And would they be eligible to receive compensation for their likeness or time on TV? TV exposure continues to expand for women's sports, one of Nicole's favorite research topics. But with the ESPN platforms, Big Ten Network, as well as some of the other college networks. Judge Wilkins' recent ruling on O'Bannon, Title IX was not directly addressed. One component of her injunction indicated that trusts can be created to compensate athletes, again, football and men's basketball, for their name, image, and likeness. Should this ruling be upheld, and given Title IX law, we must assume and expect that the outcome of increased spending on men will be proportionally higher spending on women. Women would be entitled to trusts as well. Wouldn't you agree? I've already made a few assumptions here, and I should clarify. The law in this area requires that athletic aid should be given in proportion to participation on your campus. So, for example, if you have 40% of your athletes that are female participants, 40% of your aid should go to those female student athletes. So the question is, will institutions commit to maintaining their current distribution of athletic aid to men and women? Will they look to make progress towards compliance if they're not already there, or will they continue to allow that gap to widen? As I said, more questions than answers. Consider this. What if athletes are permitted to receive payments for endorsements from third parties? Will women have the same opportunities for compensation? It could be argued that Title IX might not come into play if athletes are permitted to negotiate their own licensing agreements and colleges are not involved. That said, I could easily make the argument, the case that the ability to negotiate such an agreement is reflective of how an institution markets and promotes women's sports. This is part of the laundry list. Does Title IX extend to include all forms of compensation beyond what is currently considered an athletic scholarship? Still more for us to consider. Let's talk now a little bit about one of the autonomy subjects, which is also part of the O'Bannon ruling, cost of attendance. General consensus, as Sandy mentioned, a version of this legislation will be in effect and pass in January and be available to student athletes during this 15-16 upcoming academic year. This will likely be permissive legislation, which means an institution may choose to offer scholarships at this level, but it's not required to. Power 5 conferences and institutions have been clear that scholarships should be funded at this level. As the financial implications for each institution vary greatly, will they commit to provide this equitably across genders in sports? Should this be done only for headcount sports in which a student athlete on athletic aid receives full scholarship? Maybe only for those in revenue sports. On our campus, as on many others, we look to the mission and values of our institution and department when making these decisions and have committed to providing cost of attendance across the board. As Sandy stated, we have to look at what our why is and why are we using that to lead our decision making. How will those institutions that are outside the Power 5 handle this change? Will they have the resources to continue to consider both competitive equity implications? They will have to make a commitment to increase that value of scholarship for both competitive reasons and equity, and will they have the resources to do so? Many of the other autonomy focuses are important as they address the well-being of the 21st century student athlete. Lifetime educational grants, guaranteed scholarships, improved insurance benefits, all have great equity and financial implications. The priority must continue to be on education and well-being. The value of these initiatives should not be considered differently based on gender. Another significance of reform that calls for attention are the changes that have been made to the governance structure. These provide greater autonomy for the Big Five and increased representation for practitioners and student athletes in the structure. This is another area that requires the focus of those who champion women's sports. In order to ensure that the voice of supporting women's athletes is heard, it's imperative that women are involved and engaged in all aspects of NCAA governance. Successfully, NACWA, the National Association of Collegiate Women Athletic Administrators, lobbied to appoint a representative on the board of directors. The representative has served decades as an administrator in intercollegiate athletics. She's capable and will effectively articulate the practical application of such decisions. Her voice, along with a chorus of others, are needed to guide the membership with continued focus on student-athlete well-being, health and safety, and equity. As I've stated, we are facing many questions. How will these court cases and autonomy initiatives be interpreted by the NCAA? What position will conferences take? Who will take responsibility for implementation on a campus? How will Title IX be applied? As I mentioned before, these challenges will be different for each institution. We all have unique priorities, values, and resources that must be considered. How can we ensure Title IX compliance will be upheld in an unknown future? Historically speaking, Title IX was and still is a landmark catalyst for an NCAA change. While appreciating many positive effects from the legislation, we are still learning how to practically apply Title IX law. We must be diligent in our commitment to maintaining collegiate model as we find ways to provide the needed increase in support to our student athletes. Many changes will have a lasting and positive impact, but implementation will be a long and complicated process. Before moving forward, college administrators must insist that the implications for young women are considered and the future of women's sports is protected. Our former, current, and prospective female athletes will undoubtedly become industry leaders, and their experience as college athletes will contribute greatly to their future successes. While the collective impact of the forces discussed here tonight on NCAA member institutions, especially with regard to women's athletics, won't be fully realized in the near future, we must continue to demonstrate through our actions our unwavering commitment to equity. Monet Davis and the millions of other future stars are counting on it.
Thank you all. Hi, I'm Dr. Nicole Lavoie. I'm the Associate Director of the Tucker Center. And it's nights like this that I am really thankful and love my job. And first of all, because I can put peanut butter on my bagel without discussion. Second, I have amazing colleagues. Third, I get to teach some of the best students in the country, many of you that are sitting in the audience. Hopefully, Kenny, you're out there because you got a shout out. And I get to interact with some of the best scholars across the country in many different disciplines who are very knowledgeable about issues about girls and women in sport. And I'm also thankful that I can do the math because I'm pretty sure that these guys hit a home run out of the park tonight. So please join me in thanking them once again. We're going to now segue into a question and answer session, but before we do that, we're going to circle briefly back to Erin because she's our legal expert, as she demonstrated in the opening. And we wanted her to circle back to tie up any loose ends about issues about Title IX or not that Sandy and Beth mentioned.
I'm a law professor, law trained, so I'm not going to turn down the opportunity to have the microphone. But I honestly think that Beth's analysis of Title IX was right on. I mean, I looked at those issues independently and reached the same conclusion. The Title IX's requirement for equal treatment between your men's and women's program would apply to any new forms of compensations that athletes might receive, either by virtue of the O'Bannon remedies or that they might obtain through collective bargaining if they can unionize. That strikes a lot of people, though, as really counterintuitive. Why would you pay people whose efforts aren't generating any revenue? This is America. That's not how it works, right? So I just want to maybe just head that counterargument off by pointing out that it's true, right? That makes no sense from a business perspective. None. Why would you pay more money to people whose efforts aren't generating revenue? And the answer is Title IX is not a business statute. Title IX is a civil rights statute. Colleges and universities have put themselves in the position of having to comply both with civil rights laws and with laws that protect workers and others against the efforts of business by running their athletic programs as a hybrid of both. So if you're going to run your program as a hybrid of both and you're going to capitalize on being associated with education, you're going to receive federal funding, you're going to receive tax-exempt status, you're going to receive that goodwill, you got to play by the rules of civil rights. And if you're going to run your program as a business and you're going to seek profits on the backs of labor, then you're going to have to comply with labor law and other protections against exploitation. If you don't want to play by both sets of rules, if that's too expensive for you, you can choose to restructure your program to take yourself out of those factors that made compliance with labor law and antitrust necessary. So that's all I have to add.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you, Erin.
Well said.
Thank you.
Sandy or Beth, do you want to respond to that before we go to the audience?
No, I think that actually summed it up about as well as I've ever heard it. It is, I alluded to it in my comments. Obviously, I have an opinion, and it's an opinion I think the three of us share about the application of Title IX to image and likeness funds, cost of attendance stipends. I do find it very difficult. I just don't understand how those, and some really smart lawyers are the ones claiming that because it's based on revenue, that these things would not apply. But the one thing I always go back to is Title IX is blind to source of revenue, source of funds, and it's very clear to me what the answer is. But I hope we got that on film because I want to capture that. So. Thank you.
If I find my math, it's going to cost you some money.
You always cost me money, Mary Jo.
It's a tough crowd. Okay, we have 2 microphones in the back there, so we'd like to open it up for questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and Marnie and Carolyn will come and find you.
Thanks for your great discussion and all your expertise. I learned a lot in this session already. My name is Curtis Holden. I'm a student here, graduate student, kinesiology, sports management. So my question is, we've heard the debate about what you were just talking about the scholarship or student athlete scholarship model versus the paying athletes income versus paying income or to athletes. So it seems like the two systems are mutually exclusive. So if a paying athletes model is adopted, then that would mean that they would be earning income and then they would be subject to taxes. And
that they don't understand.
Exactly. So I don't know if that point's been made clearly enough in this debate, and what's your opinions on that? Which system you think is better for the student athletes overall and for the colleges and universities from a financial standpoint?
Oh boy, that's another question. I do think there is a middle road. I heard both of my colleagues use the term the collegiate model, and that we must maintain the collegiate model. I fervently agree with that. We required autonomy so that we could get some of these things done, so that we could actually avert disaster. And disaster, in my mind, would be, how many of y'all ever heard, Rick Tellender was a wide receiver at Northwestern, became a Sports Illustrated. Yeah, well, you went to Northwestern, Lynn. Wrote a book literally 30 years ago called The 100-Yard Lie. You should all go back and get it, because he recommended or threw out there, fine, institutions should decide whether they want to be in the entertainment business or they want to be in the education business. And if they want to be in the education business, everybody that's in that bucket, in that division, in that conference, whatever, plays by these rules and kind of rolls back, pulls the horse back into the barn. And those that want to be in the entertainment business, you have an entertainment division that basically provides games and entertainment. And if those participants want to go to school, they can, but they don't have to, and they're just going to get paid. That's not why I got into this. But if that's what people want to do, then at least we know what rules we're playing by.
I would just add quickly, and Sandy alluded to this when she was in her thoughts, but at some point, presidents are going to work with athletic directors to draw the line. And I wouldn't presume to speak for our president, but when you start to talk about actually paying student athletes above and beyond the cost of attendance, that's when they get in the game.
Senator McCaskill and a number of others from Washington recently sent out not a questionnaire, but asked us as institutions to answer a whole bunch of questions. And one of them was around essentially pay for play. Would you support providing compensation for image and likeness? And we'd gone through all the other questions around healthcare and around lifelong scholarships and around guaranteed multi-year guaranteed scholarships, all the things that have been in the mainstream. And we Penn State said yes to all of those. And when we got to the last question about image and likeness, would you support it? We said no, we would not. We are completely in favor of bettering the opportunities and the situation and the quality of what student athletes get, but we draw the line at anything that would be considered pay for play or for performance.
Great, thanks. Another question? There's one down here in the front, Caroline.
Then would it be fair to ask who is not drawing the line there of institutions that are saying, let's go for this?
Well, I would certainly say none of us have drawn the line leading up to this, which is part of why we're here. We've all just kept, somebody is desperate to hire that coach or get a leg up by doing this or that. And somebody pays a whatever coach $100,000 more, and then the next person pays them another $20,000, and then all of a sudden we've gone from 2 coaches in football making 7 figures to 70 or 80. None of us have drawn the line up till now. I think this is the one where some lines are going to get drawn in the sand. Frankly, and I hope so. I hope presidents and ADs stand up together and do this.
Well, while somebody else raises their hand, I have one follow-up question. Sandy, you said something that was interesting.
Only one thing?
Many things. One in particular, that once the Big Five have autonomy, you would hope that they don't exercise that autonomy. What did you mean by that particularly?
Kind of what we're talking about right here. Okay, so now the 65 and the 5 big conferences, whatever label you want to put on us, have the opportunity. We're the ones that have the greater resources, although really interestingly, and I've had the opportunity to be the AD at 3 different places, 3 very different situations, 3 very different financial situations. The top of the 65 versus the middle versus the lower end is very different. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the hang-ups in all of this, frankly, the hang-up on our way to the cliff to disaster is going to be that the 65 are not going to be able to agree on what we need to do. But once we have autonomy, we need to have the discipline not to say, well, just because we have it, we can now vote in that we want to do. Well, actually, I'll give you a great example. The meals legislation. It allowed us to provide unlimited meals for student athletes. We got out of the bagels and nuts and chocolate milk versus not chocolate milk versus crazy that adults were spending their time doing this. So they just took the lid off it. The first thing that happened, and I won't name any names, not in our conference, but the first thing that happened was that schools started asking for interpretations. And what they wanted to be able to do, what they were asking to be able to do, and sadly enough today, 4 months later, we still do not have an answer to this. But what they wanted to do was be able to provide the board portion. So the full scholarship, tuition fees, room, board, and use of books. The board portion, which is supposed to cover 21 meals a week, they wanted to be able to provide the cash as a scholarship, and then actually turn around and provide 21 meals a week. That, to me, is the kind of stuff we have to have the discipline to say, no, that's not what this was about. Mm-hmm. All that is about putting money in pockets.
Great. Another question from the audience. Dr. Kane.
Okay, so this is kind of it is a legal question related to what you were saying in terms of the first legal, the National Labor Relations Board decision. So the thing that concerns me, because I'm concerned that we're going to have enormous cannibalization within sports and between sports. So the decision basically said that every single football player who's on scholarship, meaning 85, is going to be counted as generating revenue for the university. Isn't that correct? I mean, that every one of those 85 scholarship athletes will benefit theoretically. No, that was the labor relations thing. I'm talking about in the second one. Are you with me? In terms of the O'Bannon,
Yes,
the likeness,
the
likeness,
Got
okay?
it.
But the assumption is that in football and men's basketball, everyone's likeness is being used, and therefore they should all be treated equally, and we all know that that is not true.
Yes.
So that's point A. Then point B is with respect to Title IX around these legal challenges, because could not one argue that a Rachel Bannum or a Lindsay Whalen, when she was here before, was generating just as much revenue in terms of interest as was, with all due respect, a second string or a third string offensive guard.
Yes.
So are the Title IX legal people waiting until all these decisions become finalized and then filing a Title IX lawsuit based upon those kinds of legal arguments?
Yeah. Well, I'm not aware that that's a litigation, that the litigation strategy is like formally begun, but I think that line of thinking makes a lot of sense. I think that it's actually really important to understanding the Title IX implications of O'Bannon, the fact that in the remedy the judge created, you would be receiving access to the trust fund by virtue of being on the team. And she actually even specifies that everyone on the team would have to get the same amount, because that's how we ensure that it's not pay for performance. If you're paying someone by virtue of being on a team and your teams are separated by sex, Title IX says that's a distinction based on sex. And that's actually part of the reason why I argue Title IX would apply to those benefits as well. It actually might even make it harder to argue that Title IX applies if it was the case that the distinction wasn't between men versus women, but between athletes whose likenesses are valuable and athletes who aren't. that might actually seem like a distinction other than sex, to which Title IX wouldn't apply, but it would be taken care of by allowing athletes with valuable likenesses like Lindsay Whalen to also share in that, share in the trust fund remedy.
So this is a conversation we were having on the Berkeley campus, and this would be a showstopper when I would bring this up amongst my colleagues. The most visible and marketable student athlete on the Berkeley campus is a young woman by the name of Missy Franklin. Yeah, it's crazy.
Hi, this question is for Sandy. Because of the isolation, I'll say isolation, or the uniqueness of the leading five, the big five. Now you're a part of that big five. You're an athletic director at a Big Ten school. What appetite do you have to actually lead the collaboration or collusion to make things right so that they don't go over the cliff? I mean, of the big five, someone has to emerge as a leader. Sandy, are you going to be that leader?
Together with Eric Barron, yeah. It's one of the reasons I took the job, is because Eric is committed to that, is committed to the educational piece. Always, Penn State always has been, and we will fight that fight.
Thank you, Sandy. You heard it here first.
And Dr. Barron will be getting a copy of that tomorrow. Okay.
Any other questions from the audience?
So this is a question kind of directed towards Sandy. You had said that you haven't really just collegiate, intercollegiate athletics haven't really done a good job of articulating the value of an athletic scholarship, and you haven't really explained to the public what the finances are. And with this stipend to kind of fill the gap of not filling that entire athletic scholarship, I'm a student of Mary Jo's, and she had stated, she kind of gave us the Spark Notes version of the value of their athletic scholarship, and I was wondering if you could kind of just go a little bit more off that and give us a better understanding of that, and then maybe compare that value of a football player versus a women's athletic participant, I would say.
Yeah, and I know we have several current or former athletic directors in the room who I think would probably agree. Both the NCAA has done a terrible job of this. Us as campuses have done a not so good job of this. As the proverbial hit the fan through all of this, I think each of us went back to our campuses and went back to either our compliance people or and said, I need some data. I need something around what we spend on a student athlete in any particular year. And certainly the private institutions, the value of the scholarship, just from a sheer dollar standpoint, is going to be larger. Although there's also another way to look at that, which is what's the average starting salary out of your institution. We've looked at it both ways at both of the institutions I've been at in the last 8 weeks. And then you add in travel, you add in not only health care, but sports medicine, uniforms, tutoring, counseling. You add in all of that, and the number at Berkeley was upwards of $250,000 a year. That's not chump change, and our students, and again, I think that there is this issue that's kind of maybe the dark cloud at the back of this. That's Ed O'Banion claims that he didn't get an education at UCLA. Well, UCLA is a wonderful institution. It's not as good as Berkeley, but it's if Ed O'Banion didn't get an education at UCLA, shame on him. Shame on him for not standing up. There are wonderful people in the faculty at UCLA that would have come to Ed's rescue, would have championed his cause if he felt. If he didn't go to class, whose fault is that? This is being taped, right? The manager who was supposed to go get him out of bed and take him to class, right? So I mean, those are my issues. Certainly the women's gymnastics team that maybe doesn't necessarily charter, although at some SEC schools the women's gymnastics team does charter. It's not going to be $250, but it's going to be six figures. So again, student athletes in today's Division I, Power 5 conferences are being invested in their health and welfare, their education. Some of the things that particularly the Northwestern students, football players, were asking for are things that the 65 are doing. And they're asking for the right to negotiate for that. And I'm a Northwestern grad also, and couldn't have picked a worse school to have tried to go after this issue. But
Joe, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand.
I can't help myself, right?
I'm just curious. None of this is new to those of us who have been working in sport for all of our lives. And the Knight Commission has done a good job of addressing many of the things that you talked about. So why has there been such a disconnect? Is it because the presidents are not leading? Or is it because...
It's money.
Right, it is money. And the salaries of the coaches and the salaries of the president, but they're all dependent on athletics.
Thank you for not throwing the athletic director in there.
Well, I was going to, that was my second question, whether you took a pay cut, but.
To go to Penn State? No, I did not.
Aren't you glad you came, Sandy? She'll never come back again. It is.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Okay, so it's not new.
No.
Where is the big disconnect?
Yeah, the disconnect is actually I think, and I'd like to stop talking here. And we think our value is in winning, and we think that to win we have to spend more money, and that if we just spend a little more money, that we'll win, and that all will be good. We'll be very valuable to our institutions and our alumni, and they'll give us more, and it's just a vicious cycle. And you're right, it's because it's ultimately, and I mean, I'll throw athletic directors under the bus, including myself too. At some point we have to say enough is enough. The question we got up here, enough is enough. And an athletic director is not going to be able to stand up without his or her president. So the athletic director and the president are going to have to stand up together and say, this is what we're going to do.
Right, but
and it hasn't happened.
Right, and you talked about more money, more wins, but all of the research says that's not true. That the more money you spend does not translate into more wins.
I can testify to that.
Okay. Thank you. And what was the salary?
It's public record. You can go look it up.
I'm almost afraid to ask for more questions. Gee.
I'm not taking any more. They are.
I actually have one for Beth. Beth, I like the part where you ended with and started with the future female athletes. Where's it going from here? I like that picture of Lindsay and Monet. What do you looking 10, 20 years down the road, what do you think that's going to look like for female athletes in big-time college sports?
I think my hope is that it looks like the experience that I was fortunate enough to have, that Lindsay was fortunate enough to have, and that our student athletes are experiencing today, and that their opportunity to participate in sport at the collegiate level informs the rest of their life. It helps them with their leadership opportunities. They learn teamwork. They learn all the things that we like to share and look at how that's going to help build them a successful future in the career of their choice. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but my hope is that we continue down the path that we have right now.
Can I ask a friendly follow-up amendment? So at the University of Minnesota, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but when you all sit around in the athletic department, you, Norwood, your team, your administrative team, and all these things are coming down. How are you thinking about it? What are the things that keep you up at night in terms of how this is going to be resolved, both short-term and long-term?
Well, I think our CFO hasn't slept here in about, a couple months with all the financial implications. But, I think, as we look to our athletic director and to the president, they talk a lot about the values of the institution and what our mission is in our athletic department. So as we make any decision, it's how is that going to fit into what we say we want to be about. Equity is a commitment of ours, and it's a challenge on every campus, and we know that, we recognize that. But we take a look at what that means and how we can move farther in that direction. So it's a constant discussion about what the next step is, what it should look like, what's best for our student athletes, and what's best for the University of Minnesota.
Great. Well, I'll just ask the panelists to maybe one concluding big thought of the night, and then we'll wrap it up. Erin, do you want to start? We'll put you on. Just doesn't have to be profound. Just one big idea.
Well, I think it's a really exciting time to care about college sports. I think I just want to underscore, what draws me to this discussion and what draws me to this debate is the power of Title IX. That's the point at which I enter. Right? I was asked to talk about the labor and the antitrust thing, and that's all there in the background. But really the most important thing to me is that in the end we end up with college athletic programs that truly are in the service of equality to men and women. And that might not be big-time college athletics as it currently looks. Big-time college athletics doesn't serve a lot of students. I'm sorry. But the rate of participation at a Big Ten school versus my humble little Division III university, it's much higher where I am. So colleges could actually serve more students in a model that was more rooted in education and that would not run into some of these problems that are putting colleges and universities in the line of fire of efforts to unionize and use antitrust laws against them.
Thank you.
So Beth used my line from my outline that I actually didn't use in my remarks, which is that, come back to your why. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? And I think that's the key to solving these issues. And I certainly don't disagree with you from the standpoint of percentage of population of students that we serve. But I actually think if we only look at it that way, we're missing the piece, the other piece of our why. Obviously our primary why is to provide this incredible student athlete experience for, in Penn State's case, 900 student athletes, which is a very small percentage of a pretty big campus. But the other part of our why is that we serve as the front porch. And we serve a very valuable and powerful, if done right, role on our campuses that through those 900 student athletes, we have an opportunity when we have numerous platforms to showcase the excellence of the entire university, to have your alumni base connect through intercollegiate athletics. And I think that's a really powerful and valuable role that intercollegiate athletics plays for these great institutions. And I think we need to keep coming back to that as we try to answer these questions about where we want to sit as an institution. And it's not going to be easy. The financial pressures are immense. But that's why if we keep coming back to the why, and the entire institution has to come back to the why. It just can't be the athletic CFO or the athletic director or the deputy athletic director. It needs to be the campus. The campus needs to understand that and continually come back to the why and not say, you fix it, you comply with Title IX, you comply with all those things, and oh, don't send us any financial headaches. It's difficult.
Thanks, Sandy. Beth? Again,
Why do you keep having me bat?
I'm the coach, you're the closer. You go. You got it.
Coming in from the bullpen.
Yeah. I think, and Mary Jo kind of set me up for what I would say would be a closing statement, but I think at the end of the day, it's really important that we listen and we find the right leaders in this argument. So I'm clearly been fortunate enough to sit next to one tonight, but as we look at the future, we need to look at our athletic directors here at Minnesota. We look for their guidance. We look for them to listen, to value the experience of each and every one of our student athletes, to value those of our current students, of our alums, and for the community and the state of Minnesota. And so for all of us, we've got to look at all of those constituents and really focus our decision making from a little thing like peanut butter on a bagel to something that's going to be really great and in terms of pay for play, cost of attendance, and these trusts, and say what is in the best interest and how can we best serve those group of individuals.
Great. Thank you. Let's give our amazing panelists another round of applause. Thank you to the three of you. I think if there were more conversations like this happening at micro and macro levels across the country, we'd be in good shape. So thank you for sharing your opinions and your expertise with us. Thank you all for coming and making this event what it is. And please join us in the lobby for some refreshments and a reception. And please continue the conversation. Thank you very much.